How have you been staying spiritually motivated during this stay-at-home order? Am I going to survive another week stuck at home with my 9-month-old? What do you think is the most underrated book of the Old Testament? And does the circus even still exist today? All that and more on the first ever episode of the C3 Sit Down. Hey, what's up, C3 family? I am Joe Chafin. Sitting alongside me is my taller, tanner, older, and less bald brother, Josh Chafin, who also happens to be the pastor here at Creston Community Church. Welcome to the first ever episode of the C3 Sit Down, where we plan on talking about life, talking about ways that we can lead people towards Jesus, talking about ways to continue changing lives and serving our community here at Creston Community Church. And we think that this is a way to provide you guys with more content during the week, during these tough times, more ways to impact you, more ways to challenge you and your spiritual walk during these times. So Josh, what are your thoughts on where this podcast is headed?
Well, I think just in general, everybody is so lonely. And I think anytime you can give people something to just sort of take their mind off of the daily grind of being at home, or maybe there might be some people that are out of work, not in their normal routine, to break that up with something, like you said, lighthearted, fun, but yet with a twist of, maybe Christ-centered thoughts, those sorts of things, scripture, just in general, I think is going to be a good thing for people. I know I like to just listen to something different every once in a while, and so I want to provide something different from the monotony of the news and whatever else you're doing every day to fill your days.
Right,
lately.
and the C3 Sit Down is not necessarily going to be limited to just myself and Pastor Josh. I have ideas and plans and things for the future to hopefully get some other people on here. Hopefully this is something we can continue beyond the whole quarantine life that we're all going through at this time. So it's not necessarily something that's going to be limited to just now. We hope to keep this going, hope to add more people to the show whenever we can. And again, kind of just a way to talk about life, to share faith, and how we're all kind of managing with the world and what's going on right now. So, moving on to really the goal of this podcast, I don't want this necessarily to just be fall on dead ears, to just, for people to listen to and then pass. I do want it to have an impact. This isn't just something that I'm looking to, just be a goof off thing and something like, this is still to drive people to Jesus, to show people that, we struggle ourselves as Christians, and we're able to still find ways to grow closer to Christ, to share Christ, and to lead people towards Him.
The vision of Creston Community Church, or another way of saying that, is our reason for existence. We adopted this a few years ago, is very simple, and it's changing lives and serving our community. And I think, in a way, this podcast has a chance, if done correctly and if done well, to do both of those things, to help change people's lives, to encourage them, to inspire them, to inform them of the teachings of Christ, and also, in a way, to be a service to our community, to give people something else to fill their days with. And again, this is probably done for Creston Community Church, but not just for Creston Community Church. I think if other people are able to listen to this and be encouraged and inspired, then we're fulfilling that vision of changing lives and serving our community.
Right, and like you said, it's not necessarily going to be tied down just to Creston Community Church. Hopefully this is something that as we get out there and get on the internet and things like that anybody can listen to, anybody can be inspired by it, anybody can be moved, and anybody can have a good laugh and just kind of enjoy, listening. Podcasts are super hot right now. Everybody seems to be doing a podcast. That's kind of why, you and I are taking a crack at it here. It's something I've wanted to do for a while, and no better time to do it than when nobody's doing anything and everybody's kind of stuck at home. So speaking of that, this quarantine life, it's been interesting. It has been challenging for myself. I know that's been challenging for my wife. And, real quick, just a shout out to anybody that is going through this quarantine life that has an infant, because it is not easy at all. I am not working. I work at the high school, so obviously school is out right now. Issa's not working at this time either, so we are both home all day, every day with a 9-month-old, and that is something that's not normal. necessarily. I know there's stay-at-home wives, there's stay-at-home dads, things like that. But for both of us to be home all day, every day, basically, and to do that with a 9-month-old has not been easy.
Not quiet at all. Nope. Lots of arguing. Amy's been actually working more, not more hours, but they are splitting her hours up over the course of more days during this quarantine.
That's got to be rare. Not many people are working more.
Yeah.
during
so
this time.
So I've been home a lot, and with my schedule, I have the flexibility to do that. So yes, I've been home quite a bit. And we've kind of gotten into a little bit of a routine. And I would say for the most part, the boys are doing well. They're behaving, they're listening, they're not going too stir crazy, but there are the moments. And yeah, there's the arguing and they're struggling to share. And so it's been challenging, but it's been fun. We're making it.
What is, as we're moving forward in the whole quarantine talk, what has been some fun parts or a story or two of, over at your house that you've experienced over the last month and a half now that we're approaching of being in this situation, of something that you have enjoyed about being, in this whole stay-at-home situation?
Well, I'm thankful that this happened in the springtime. I think everybody could probably agree that had this stay-at-home order been issued in December and we had to experience this in like December, January, February, as opposed to March, April, May, there's a big difference in those few months. Right. And just being able to get outside and take walks. And so we've really been enjoying that. We bought the boys
now, wait a second. Where are you living? Because
it's been,
spring has been a joke for April. I don't ever in my life remember in April being worse. I feel like there's been like 5 nice days.
Yeah, but even what we are saying are not nice days. As long as it's not raining, you can still get outside. If it's 20 or 10 or 15 degrees, you're not going outside. We bought the boys a basketball hoop for their birthday a few weeks ago, and even though it hasn't been like 65 and sunny, we've still been able to just get outside. I've really enjoyed mowing. I love to mow. It's just kind of therapeutic, and to take care of the yard and do that sorts of things. So I guess just in general, because the weather has been nicer, not beautiful, not perfect, but it's been nicer here this spring than obviously it was in the winter. Just being able to get outside has been super helpful. But when we're inside, one of the things that we've been doing is watching lots of movies, as I'm sure lots of people
the whole world is.
That's kind of all you can do. And so, catching up on movies and just finding out that there are some really, really good movies out there. One of the ones that that we recorded and we've rewatched, I don't know how many times at our house, is The Greatest Showman. And I never would have
even heard of it.
Well, I never would have thought that I would have. It's actually a musical, and you think, at least for me, musical, no thanks. But it's got Hugh Jackman in it, the guy that plays Wolverine in X-Men, and Zac Efron. And it's about the circus. So Barnum and Bailey Circus, P.T. Barnum. This is what the movie's about.
Is the circus even a thing anymore?
No, the circus is gone. That's
it's completely gone. Like it does not exist anywhere.
I don't think it exists anywhere. Maybe a few small town ones, but
wow. So the circus is just gone.
Yeah, well, because you can't train the animals anymore, and they it's just not anything like what it used to be. But the circus took America by storm, took the world by storm, in the early 1900s, and that's what this is about. The beginning of P.T. Barnum and his circus, and it's a great musical. It's got a great soundtrack, and it's a really good story. And I don't know, like I said, maybe 5 or maybe even 10 times we've watched it, and love the songs in it, love the movie, the story that it tells. So lots of movies. I mean,
movies have definitely been a thing. That's kind of been a thing for my wife and I really since we've been married. When we first got married, I was not fluent in Spanish, and she wasn't fluent in English. So we both could defend ourselves to a point in each other's language, but we definitely weren't fluent like we are now. And like one of the things that we would do, that it was kind of a hobby, I guess, we would watch something on Netflix where we would put the movie like in English, and then she can read the Spanish subtitles. So like it was a way for us kind of to connect early, was like we could share that experience together, both understand fully what's going on. So like we've always kind of been, on Netflix and watching movies and stuff, and we've knocked out so many series, just like watch an episode after we put Genesis to bed or at night or whatever. And I'm pretty sure there's like nothing else on Netflix for us that's worth watching. So we're like to the point now where we're like almost burnt out on on Netflix, on movies. I know the new documentary with Michael Jordan came out recently. That's kind of been a huge thing. I have the episodes recorded. I haven't had time. Shocker.
I watched those the other night. They are amazing. It's got some bad language. So anybody that's listening to this, if you do watch
even on the ESPN version.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
they're not.
No,
it's not like edited?
It says it. It says it right there. Watch out. Not suitable for children. Whatever that warning is that comes on.
Wow.
And so yeah, because it's raw footage and it's them being honest about it. But it's called The Last Dance.
Right.
And I think 4 episodes have been released. I watched all 4 of them the other night. I got addicted to it and I was just blown away. Highly recommend it. Again, as long as you can look past the language thing, but it's very
right.
very
And
good.
that would have been something more for you because you were born
when I
like
was
in
growing up,
86.
yeah.
So like when Jordan was 96, you would have been like 10. So that would have been like the height of your, fandom as a child. It was a little bit before my time. But a lot of Clevelanders, they don't like Jordan because he took us to school for a few years, but obviously, yeah, global phenomenon. So that's something I have recorded. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet. But yeah, that's something that I've definitely been interested in. I also watched this show. It's called The Curse of Oak Island. It's about this like island in Nova Scotia. And like these guys, they've been like looking for this treasure people have been searching for it for like hundreds of years, and like 7 people have died looking for it. And like, there's just like, they've discovered so much that like, it has me keep watching, but at the same time, they still haven't found the treasure. But like, I don't know, it's got me hooked. Just like, I guess the thrill of trying to find this treasure.
Yeah, there's no treasure. They're never going to find a treasure. There's no Loch Ness monster.
No,
there's
listen,
no Bigfoot.
Listen,
there's no treasure.
they have found bones of humans 170 feet under the ground that are of Europe descent. So it's not even from here. Which and they have a thing from the Templars, a lead cross they found from the Templars, things that literally did not exist on this side of the planet that are here that have been scientifically dated like in the 1600s. Mm-hmm. So like, we had they had a piece of wood in the swamp that they found in this big structure, and it was crazy because they had like they did the what's it called when you date a tree, dendrochronology or something, where like you count the rings to see how old a tree is or whatever. And they found a piece of wood that was from like 1100 AD. Like there's evidence that Christopher Columbus was not the first one over here in the Americas, and the Templar. I mean, it is just it's crazy. And yeah, there's probably not treasure, but they have found so many things that make you believe that they are going to find a treasure someday. So going back to quarantine life, obviously there's been some fun things, like you said, catching up on movies, relaxing, spending time with the family. But there's a lot of people out there that are struggling big time with this. And, Issa and I, we have our moments where we're both kind of just looking at each other like, if this baby whines one more time, like I'm going to stick it outside and shut the door, because we're just like going nuts. So like, I know that, you got people with mental health issues, people with addictions. I mean, there's also a very dark and negative side to this stay-at-home order. For you personally, what's been difficult, what's been challenging, about, being stuck in your house?
I'm a very routine person. I have my routine. When the routine gets messed up for any reason, it does throw me off. And so, yeah, not having any, what I would say, written in stone requirements. I have certain things that I need to accomplish throughout the week as a pastor, obviously. But now there's no daily timeline. It's just, you got to get this done by the end of the week, and you can kind of do it whenever you want. And so I'm not necessarily keeping office hours at the church. And so that's really been difficult for me, being out of my routine, not having a real schedule to keep, being able to sort of sleep in really every day, not having to get up for any reason. And I found that to be challenging. It was fun for the first little bit, but it's fun from time to time, but at least a couple of days a week, even if I don't have to, I'm getting myself up early, I'm getting a shower, I'm getting dressed. And even if I do all that just to walk out to the kitchen table and sit in front of my computer, I still do it.
It's like a kickstart to the day.
Yes.
Like if
It's-
you do
it's
that,
mental.
you're
It's a
setting
mental thing.
you're setting yourself up to continue
Yeah.
with like a productive day.
Yep.
You know, it's funny you say that. The other day, it was so simple. I got up semi early. It was like 8:00, which is obviously it's like an hour and 45 minutes later than what I normally do when I'm working. But I got up. Isa was hungry. I went to Worcester and got us breakfast and brought it home. And literally just getting up kind of early and getting in my car and driving to Worcester and bringing like when I got back home, I already like felt better than I had like the previous 3 days, where it was just like wake up, eat a bowl of cereal, like sit around, wait for Genesis to wake up and stuff. So it's like just literally me getting up, driving somewhere and coming back home at like some kind of endorphins in my brain. And it just like made me feel so much better. Just, that simple act. I know Issa and I, we've struggled with our bedtime. Like, when we were both working, we could barely make it to like 10 o'clock and we're both like nodding our heads on the couch. Like we got to go to bed.
Yeah.
And now like the first like 3 weeks we were staying up till like 11:30, just like watching movies and stuff. And like, we kind of just realized like, dude, we better stop. Cause eventually we're going to like get back to the real world, and staying up till 11:30 is not going to be okay. And we're going to feel like horrible morning. Yeah. But like, yeah, the routine thing is definitely something that I've struggled with. I know people too are struggling to stay motivated, whether it be their job or things in their life or their spiritual life. And like, what have you been able to do to kind of stay motivated spiritually? Because I know, the first 2 weeks in this, I feel like was kind of just like fun and games. It was like, oh, we played board games at night, and it was like, haha, we're stuck at home. And like we got into like week 3 and 4 of this, and it started to be like, okay, this is getting old. And like, then you're starting to realize, man, I haven't been to church in 3 weeks. I've watched church and I've been a part of it, but it's like, not seeing everybody, I realized, oh man, it's been a couple of days since I've read the Bible, and it's like, being kind of stuck in this world makes the whole spiritual life and accountability thing tough for me. How has that been for you?
Well, I don't know that it's been, I'm trying to think and be honest. It hasn't been that different because
you're still going to the church during the
I'm
week.
still going to the church. I'm still doing a weekly Bible study. I'm still preparing a weekly sermon. But in general, yeah, some days have been great. Some days have been not so great. Again, because there hasn't been really a routine. One of the things that I've started doing basically since quarantine, I've been reading the Psalms on a fairly regular basis. And if you know anything, about the Psalms, then there's lots of things that are encouraging in the Psalms. Just the other day, I was in Psalm 51, and this is what it says in verse 10. It says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me from your presence or take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me." And just reading those few words, that I don't know how many other times in my life that I've read those, it was what I needed that day to just be reminded that, it is the Lord that grants us what we need to be sustained.
Now, what is the context of that? Is that like a plea?
Well,
is that somebody that's like in distress?
Absolutely. That the context of that is King David is writing that right after the prophet Nathan called him out for his adultery with Bathsheba.
Okay.
So
that's the guy that he sent out to basically die.
Well, no, the prophet is the Nathan is the prophet. You're talking about the one that, Bathsheba's husband
that he sent out to war to basically knowing he was going to die.
Yes, but the prophet Nathan is who is calling David out for this,
for doing that and getting with,
for doing that and being with Bathsheba.
So he's being confronted with some serious
his sin. Yeah, and earlier in Psalm 51, he's saying, "Have mercy on me, O God, wash away all of my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin." He's
like disgusted with himself.
He's disgusted with himself, but he's pleading with God to create in him a pure heart, to grant him a willing spirit so that he can, find to be sustained, basically. And I think all of us are, struggling during this time to find something within us to sustain us, to keep us going. And in King David's case, when he was struggling with the sin of committing adultery, even in his sin, he knew that it was only the Lord that was going to sustain him. And I just found encouragement from that, and that's where I've been finding encouragement a lot lately, is in the different Psalms.
Yeah, I can be honest. I can admit my knowledge. I know the Old Testament. I rarely go there.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know why. I just like, for me, I'm even though I've read the Gospels, I don't know how many times, and I know the story of Jesus very well. I guess I'm sometimes I get just fixated on that because like that's the most recent thing that happened in the Bible. That the Bible was totally new in the New Testament. God was new in the New Testament as far as like his rulings and things. So like I guess I just like sometimes I just like I don't even really go to the Old Testament. Sometimes I'm intimidated to go to the Old Testament because some of the things that happen in the Old Testament are just like so different from the New Testament that like, it's something that I need to be better at, because essentially the Old Testament is prophesying Jesus.
A good portion of it.
What is to come. So without the Old Testament, the New Testament doesn't really exist. It doesn't have the validity without everything that took place in the Old Testament. So that's good.
And in the New Testament, you don't have books like Psalms.
Right.
You don't have poetry.
They're more like stories. Not stories, but like writing about what's going on. Yeah. Storytelling, yeah. But yeah, the Old Testament, I need to go in there. Speaking of the Old Testament, what do you feel is like one of the most underrated books of the Old Testament? Something that, not Daniel in the lion's den, not David and Goliath, not Jonah and the whale, not like the main things you learn as a kid, but like something that you feel like kind of maybe can get unnoticed at times, just an underrated book of the Old Testament.
Well, we've spent for the last 5 weeks on our midweek study, which we've been doing on Zoom, that video platform, when we get together with people in the church and study the Bible together and pray for one another. For about the last 5 weeks, we've been talking a lot about suffering, and I had planned on talking about suffering long before the coronavirus was ever a thing. It was a topic that I wanted to study with everybody. And a good portion of the time that we've been talking about suffering, we've been looking at the story of Job. And so I think Job is an underrated story because, what Job experienced was obviously, it was awful. It was terrible. He lost his family. He lost his fortune. And on top of all that, his wife was blaming him for the loss of everything, and it wasn't his fault. Then he had these 3 friends that showed up, and they were blaming him, saying, Job, clearly you did something to deserve all of this suffering that you're experiencing. And it's just this long book. It's, 40-some chapters, I think, of just this going back and forth between Job and his 3 friends, and they're giving him such a hard time, and he's going through so much pain and so much suffering. And
physically and mentally and spiritually.
Yeah, because he has sores all over his body, so he's in physical pain. He's in emotional pain because he's lost his entire family and all of his wealth and everything. And then on top of all that, he's got, his wife and his 3 friends basically saying, this is all your fault. Like, you did something to deserve this, Job, when, we know from the story that he didn't. And that's the thing that I think that is applicable to what we're experiencing right now with this, coronavirus. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if, we're experiencing this in our world because, the world is sinful, and we're being taught a lesson. I don't claim to know exactly if that's what's going on, but what I do know is there is suffering in this world, and it's not always because somebody did something wrong. There is suffering that exists, and Job is the perfect example of that. He did nothing wrong to have all of that suffering come on him. It's just a result of the sinfulness that's in this world. He just experienced it. There was another story that we talked about briefly in our study, and it's I think from John chapter 9. where there was a man that was born blind. And Jesus was close to this man. His disciples said, "Hey, Jesus, look over there at that guy that's blind. Whose sin caused his blindness? Him."
As in, like, somebody else could have done something, and that's why this guy was born
Well, that's
blind.
what the disciples were asking. They were saying, did this man sin to cause his blindness, or was it his parents? Like, was he suffering from like a generational thing? And Jesus, his response was neither. This man didn't sin to cause his blindness. It wasn't that his parents sinned, but he is experiencing this suffering so that I might be glorified. And listen, that's hard to hear, right? That we go through things in this life so that God might be glorified. That we go through pain and suffering so that God would be glorified. That's not always easy to hear when you're in the midst of the suffering. You know, I'm sure Job would have preferred not to go through what he went through, all the suffering. I'm sure there are people that are right now that are suffering and going through an incredibly difficult season of their life, and they would prefer not to be going through that.
Right.
But if there was not suffering, if there was not difficulty, we would have no need for God. And God would not be able to be glorified because there would be nothing negative to compare it to. And so it's not necessarily an easy lesson, but I think we've found encouragement in our study. I know I have, that if we're not tested, if we're not challenged, then we, in our weakness, God is made strong.
And really, the only way that would have been a reality for any of us would have been if Eve didn't eat the apple. Mm-hmm. I mean, the world is not perfect, so we're going to face difficulties and struggles and things. And hearing you say that reminded me of the example. I think you've shared it before at some point in one of your sermons, but of the ecosystem that they grew inside of like that dome, mm-hmm. where like the trees grew up and they were like they had the perfect amount of rain, the perfect amount of sun, all that stuff. They grew up in like a perfect environment, and then the trees would get so big and then they would just collapse. And they basically realized, like, without the wind and the roughness of wind and storms and things like that of life, the trees were weak. They couldn't even hold themselves up. So like literally wind and kind of getting pushed around and the difficulties of life is what makes the trees strong, not like growing up in a perfect world, which is what they kind of created for that. And it's like, I mean, yeah, without any of those things, it's not possible to grow. And it's like, I feel like God used Job as like the most extreme example possible for us to look at, because like, you're really not going to find anybody that went through as much as Job did. Like, not that people don't lose a child or a spouse or a house, but like the example of Job is so extreme that it's like nobody on earth today is going through something that Job went through. Like literally losing all of your family, being blamed for it, being covered in physical sores. I mean, it's pretty hard to find a realistic comparison in today's world of what Job went through. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like that's the why God put that in the Bible, was because, we're going to struggle. And if we can read the book of Job and say, look, Job didn't even, did he have tough times? Sure. But like, he never lost his faith. And that's like the perfect example of like, when you go through tough times, as long as you still are professing to God and willing to follow him in the midst of that, if Job can do it, we don't have near as much to really be complaining about, because we've never experienced anything close to what he did. And you kind of stole my thunder, because Job was also the book I picked. We probably should have went over that before we started the podcast. But Job was also the one I picked. He was the most underrated person, I thought, because it's very easy to kind of skip over that. Like I said, you hear the big dogs, Noah and Moses and Adam and Abraham. And it's like Job just kind of is in there, but like Job overcame as much, if not more, than any of those other guys did. Yeah. So Job is big time. You have been preaching to kind of go a different route here. You've been preaching kind of series over the last few years at C3 in the mornings, and I enjoy them. It's something I can follow easily and kind of look forward to. I always love the images and seeing things like that. So, all of our series, by the way, are on our website at crescentcc.org. All of Josh's sermons I think the last 2.5 years.
I think going back to 2017, yes, 2017, 2018, and 2019. I'm pretty sure.
Right. So there's like 3 solid years where every sermon Josh has preached is on the website. So like any series you remember from the last 3 years that you feel like you enjoyed, you go to crescentcc.org and go to the sermon series. You're going to be able to find the audio of that sermon, like you said, like the last 3 years. But I was wondering for you, as you're the one preparing these things, you're the one getting them ready and studying them and stuff. Has there been a favorite series or one, maybe not your favorite, but one that stands out that you've done over like the last 3 years?
Well, when I think about one that has stood out, where my mind goes is there one that I'm constantly referring back to? Like whatever the main
one that
point
is not like it hasn't fully escaped you. Like
yeah,
it's reoccurring.
And even in the series that I do after it, if some of the main themes were so good that I'm interweaving them or using them as illustrations in the series that I'm doing now, and I'll throw a shout out just as sort of an honorable mention to The Story, because that took up almost all of 2019.
Right. That was like one giant series.
It was one giant series, basically from January through September, and we basically went from Genesis through Revelation, kind of summarizing the main parts of the Bible, which is one big story. And that idea of upper story and lower story, I feel like is a simple enough idea that, basically meaning, this life that we're living, we're living it in the lower story, and we have a very limited perspective from this lower story perspective. But we have to remember that there's an upper story that is also being written, and that's from God's perspective. And so that idea of the upper story, lower story has made the sermon series, The Story, an important one for me. But I threw that out as an honorable mention because really I think the one that I keep going back to the most is from 2018, and it was the prayer series. And the reason why I keep going back to it is because I feel like the main theme of that series is so important. Number one, because prayer is so important. It's something we do every day. And so doing a series on prayer makes it automatically, one of the most important series that I've done.
I think in that series, tell me if I'm wrong, is that where you gave the example of kind of how to pray, and you used the example of like, God, you are everything and I am nothing?
I believe that was part of one of the
prayer
sermons.
series?
I believe so. Yep.
Because there are times I still pray that I remember from that series of just like where I'm like kind of at a loss for words, and it's just like, God, you're everything and I am nothing.
Yeah.
Like I can't do anything or accomplish anything, without you.
Yep.
And like I think that was from that series, and that still pops into my mind every once in a while.
Yep. But the main theme that has always stuck with me was sort of how we defined that series. It was the tagline, if you will, and it was that you're never going to get a busy signal when you want to communicate with God. With God, the lines of communication are always open. There's never going to be a busy signal when we're trying to reach God. And so trying to get the point across to people that, no matter what you're experiencing in this life, you're never going to pray to God and get nothing back. You're never going to pray to God and get a busy signal. You're never going to pray to God and run out of time if you're calling collect or whatever. I think that's so applicable for us today.
And I think, too, you're never going to pray to God and God is going to be like, that's not that big of a deal. You don't need to pray about that.
Right.
Because, like, I feel like there's people, too, at times when they're thinking about praying and they're like, how am I going to sit here and pray for something in the big picture that might not be that big of a deal when there's somebody out there whose child was born with cancer, or there's somebody who husband just passed away. You know what I mean? Like, you go to these things and it's like, I'm not going to waste God's. Well, it's like, well, God, first off, God is God. So like you can't overwhelm God. Whether your problem is small or massive, God cares about each person individually, and it's like you're never also gonna pray to Him something that's not significant to Him or not important, to Him. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in like, do I need to pray about that? Well, yeah. If you ever utter that phrase in your mind, do I need to pray about that? Just pray about it.
Yeah.
Like you said, he's never busy. He's not gonna go busy on you. One of your series that sticks out to me. There's a couple that I go back to at times. How to Eat an Elephant stuck out because it's goofy. The thought of that, so it's something that stuck into my mind. And sometimes when I'm trying to accomplish something, and I'm not getting there maybe fast enough, or I'm not getting answers fast enough, or I'm not figuring out something fast enough, it's a way of patience, a way to remind me of patience. Of like, as long as I'm taking steps forward every day, I eventually I'm going to eat the elephant. Like, what I can't do is try to jump from here, from A to R, or from A to Z. It's like, there's times where I wish I could, and I'm wondering where is Z? Where's the end of this? And it's like, as long as you're still moving forward, time, many examples in the Bible, is almost insignificant. I mean, there's like hundreds of years that pass before things happen, or before prayers are answered and things. So like, I remember How to Eat an Elephant. I remember that one sticking out, and I can't believe I'm going to say this because I don't want to botch the name, but another favorite one of mine was, it had something to do with simple.
Simple Faith.
Was that one? Simple Faith.
That was it was an Advent series we did for Christmas. Was it around
yes,
Christmas time?
I think so. Yeah, I think it was around Christmas time, and that's been a while. That might have even been like 3 years ago. But I remember at that time in my life, I was overwhelmed with a bunch of stuff going on, and just the idea of simplifying things. The thought of that initially was like, you can't simplify things. That's like taking steps back. That's like not doing enough for my faith, and to realize like, okay, I have complicated things, and I could just take a step back, like, I just need to get back to the basics.
Yep.
And kind of just like catch my breath here, and not try to be doing something, at the end of the line that I'm not ready for.
Yeah.
And I got super overwhelmed. I remember that coming at like a perfect time. But yeah, those series, I think they're ways that we can go back to. And like I said, every one of them on the website, you guys can check those out at crescencc.org. And that'll about do it for episode 1 of the C3 Sit Down with myself, Joe Chafin, and the pastor of Creston Community Church, Pastor Josh Chafin. But stay tuned for next week's episode, where we're going to be listing our top 3 favorite cereals. We're going to vote for our own MIP, or most influential or impactful person of the Old Testament. And with the NFL draft recently taking place, Josh and I are going to draft our own starting 5 players from the Bible. Lots of good stuff on the table for next week's episode, so stay tuned. Josh, any final thoughts for the listeners?
I'm looking forward to the day that we can get back together again. I don't know when that is going to be. I hope it's sooner rather than later. But until we can meet again, keep tuning in on the weekends and enjoying the online services that we're putting together. If you want to be a part of that midweek Zoom call where we can see each other and talk through the computer, let me know. But other than that, hoping to see everybody soon.
Well, you heard him, church, straight from the pastor himself. Sunday service, tune in. Wednesday's Bible study at 7 on Zoom, tune in. Thursday's C3 Sit Down podcast. Come on now, don't hurt our feelings. Tune in. And always remember, Christopher Columbus, yeah right. Stay safe and be a blessing to somebody this week.